In late 1932, Western Australia's Campion district was an agriculturally marginal stretch of the wheat belt. It was a harsh, dry place to make a living. The farmers working this land were largely discharged veterans of the First World War. When the Great Depression hit, the Australian government urged them to ramp up their wheat crops, but failed to deliver promised subsidies. This chart shows the exact squeeze these veterans were caught in, a collapse in global wheat prices intersecting with a steady rise in their own debt. To support livestock and try to turn a profit, the farmers cleared the scrub and installed artificial water supplies. Without realizing it, they had constructed a resource-rich oasis in the middle of a dry continent. By trying to force an unforgiving landscape into an agricultural grid, these farmers had inadvertently laid out an ecological welcome mat, and something was coming to claim it. As part of their regular post-breeding migration to the coast, 20,000 emus descended on the cultivated lands around Chandler and Walgoolan. Standing up to 6 feet tall, these powerful flightless birds found the newly watered farms to be an ideal habitat. The massive flock consumed and spoiled the season's wheat crop. Worse, their sheer bulk tore enormous gaps in the exclusion fences, leaving the remaining fields exposed to waves of rabbits that poured in to finish the job. Facing total ruin, the veteran settlers formed a deputation. Having survived the trenches of Europe, they knew exactly how effective concentrated firepower could be, and they petitioned the government for the deployment of heavy machine guns. The request reached the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce. He saw an opportunity. Sending the military would serve as a public relations maneuver to project strength, help the struggling farmers, and quiet down a growing secessionist movement. What started out as an issue of agricultural zoning escalated into a formal military deployment, driven entirely by economic panic and the optics of a government eager to look decisive. Command of the operation was handed to Major Gwyneth Purvis Wyn Aubrey Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery. He deployed with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis automatic machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Their arrival in October was immediately met with a heavy period of unseasonal rain. The wet weather scattered the birds across a massive area, forcing the military to sit idle until the skies cleared in early November. By November 4th, Major Meredith had identified a target. His men set up a concealed ambush position near a local dam and waited as a flock of roughly 1,000 emus marched toward them. Here we can see exactly what the soldiers were up against. Emus possess highly acute eyesight and can sprint at speeds up to 50 kilometers per hour. Once startled, they outpace both human infantry and early motor vehicles with ease. The gunners waited until the flock was right on top of them before opening fire, but after dropping only a dozen birds, the Lewis gun jammed. In the silence that followed, the remaining hundreds of emus sprinted out of range. Conventional warfare doctrine failed to account for the chaotic biological variables of the outback. Against a highly reactive, non-human target, the rigid tactics of the machine gun crew proved useless. Realizing the threat, the birds abandoned their large flocks. They split into countless highly mobile small units, making heavy military equipment incredibly inefficient. Army observers noted a fascinating behavioral adaptation. Each pack seemed to have a designated leader, a massive black-plumed emu that stood watch and warned the foraging birds the moment soldiers approached. Desperate to regain the initiative, Major Meredith pivoted to mobile warfare. He mounted one of the heavy guns to the back of a civilian truck and ordered his men to chase the flocks across the plains. The tactic was a complete logistical failure. The truck simply couldn't catch the sprinting birds on the rough terrain, and the ride was so violent that the gunner couldn't pull the trigger, let alone aim. By November 8th, the local press was mocking the campaign. With thousands of rounds fired and only a few dozen birds dead, Minister Pierce faced intense public ridicule and withdrew the military personnel in humiliation. The Australian military faced a decisive defeat. The birds' innate dispersal tactics simply outpaced the logistical reach of 1930s military hardware. The military's absence didn't stop the drought, and it certainly didn't stop the emus. With the crop still taking massive damage, the Premier of Western Australia successfully lobbied to have Major Meredith sent back into the field just days later. This second deployment lasted nearly a month. Recalled on December 10th, Meredith filed an official report claiming 986 confirmed kills. But look at his math. To achieve those numbers, his men fired exactly 9,860 rounds, 10 bullets for every bird killed, leaving the core population of 20,000 largely intact. Reflecting on the campaign, Major Meredith likened the birds to tanks. He praised their striking maneuverability under intense fire, noting that even when badly wounded, they absorbed bullets with the toughness of the Zulus. The operation proved that applying overwhelming industrial firepower to a highly dispersed biological target results in a total collapse of logistical efficiency. The farmers' struggle continued for decades, but when they requested military assistance again in 1934, 1943, and 1948, the government firmly refused to send the army. Instead, they relied on a localized bounty system that rewarded hunters for turning in emu beaks. This targeted approach proved highly effective, eliminating over 57,000 birds in just a 6-month period in 1934. The farmers also invested heavily in a long-term structural solution. They constructed massive state-spanning exclusion barrier fences to separate their crops from the migrating wildlife. The conflict demonstrated the failure of applying industrial firepower to an ecological crisis. Ultimately, the farmers found that physical barriers and local incentives were the only tools capable of stabilizing the landscape.